Welcome to Outside the Box Week 13. This is a Stokastic and Fantasy Points collaborative production. We're going to be taking a look at the tools for both sites to find the best GPP plays on the slate. While you're coming in, please like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already done so, and hit that notification button so you can get alerts when our shows go live. I am, of course, your host, Neil Orf. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. I am here with Scott Barrett. You can find Scott on Twitter at Scott Barrett. Now I forgot. Scott Barrett, DFB.
Yep.
Remind me what that stands for.
Dude Fantasy Bro.
Dude Fantasy Bro, of course. Is that right? Is that for real?
Yeah. So I started out in the industry like 9 years ago, and my boss at the time, JJ Zacharyson, told me to get on Twitter. And so I was at the bar with my friend, and the bartender was also one of my friends. He's a high stakes player for fantasy football. He's way into fantasy football. And so I was talking to the both of them like, hey, what should my Twitter name be? And I don't know, me and the bartender ended up talking about like how amazing Josh Gordon is or something like that. And we talked for like 20 minutes and no one else was at the bar. My buddy just wanted to drink. He was hammered and he was like, dude, Fantasy Bro, no one cares. Get me a drink. And so I was like, Dude Fantasy Bro. All right. And then I reveled in obscurity for 5 years. No one wanted to follow a Dude Fantasy Bro. So I changed it to Scott Barrett DFB, and my following took off, and that's the whole story.
That is a really funny story that I did not know prior to this. So I'm glad I asked, because that's awesome. Well, we need to be pretty efficient here. We're going just an hour today. We've done some shows going like 2.5 hours. We are limited to an hour today due to some scheduling conflicts. But I think that we can be efficient if we really need to. We just won't ramble too much. We won't talk about stuff that we don't need to talk about as much. So we will jump right into it.
Let me just say the scheduling conflicts on my end. Apologies if anyone's upset about that. We went ahead and made my Week 13 DFS breakdown free. That's the last thing I've retweeted on my Twitter page. These are the only time it's been free in like 3 years. This has the best track record of anything in the industry of identifying players on the winning Millie Maker lineup. I really think you don't need too much more than just this one piece of content. If you're an MME player, really think it's the best thing in the space. Put a lot of time on it. So check that out. So probably won't be as comprehensive this week, but there's that for you to fall back on.
Yep. If you want the deeper dive, Scott's got his stuff out there for free. We're getting mixed reaction. Mr. TD says, boo. Todd Burrow says, no offense, but I might like the hour better. Different people are going to like different length of show, but it's just a 1 week thing. All right. Oh, sorry. Andy has a quiet house to listen to the show. All right. We are going to take a look at last week just to start. And I want to note, Scott, you and I think we've probably made about 33 lineups together because we've done the show 11 of the 12 weeks so far. I think we've done about 3 on average. So about 33 lineups together. In general, if you make 100 lineups, you'd expect to get 1 lineup in the top 1%. Very simple math. We've made 33. Last week, we got our second lineup into the top 1% in the Millie. So we have a great track record working together, making lineups. Really fun. We finished in 617th place last week, and I am not very good at searching within the Fantasy Cruncher tool to find our lineup, so I couldn't pull that up. But I wanted to note that, and I'll read off our lineup in a minute. But first, we can take a look at the winning lineup from last week. And this is interesting, Scott, because we had our second consecutive week. We had a non-stacked quarterback win the Millie. That is insane to me. It's and we've had the conversation on this show. Like, is it a good idea to run out a quarterback unstacked in some situations? I come down on the side of no, it's not a good idea. You're just asking for you have to basically win the lottery if you don't correlate at all. You can make it better odds by correlating your quarterback. But 2 weeks in a row, Scott, we have had a non-stacked quarterback in the winning Millie Maker lineup. Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, do you think we should change our approach at all? What do you think?
No, I don't think we should be changing our approach. It's just with stacking and the correlation there. It's playing DFS on easy mode, unless you're an MME player and was this that, or was this a single bullet? But JM to Win talks about this constantly, where it's like, you're trying to pick a lock, right? And instead of trying to get all 11 things right, you do a double stack plus a bring back. Now, it's much easier on yourself to try and get a perfect lineup. You only have to get 5 things right or whatever it is. Yeah. Was this a single bullet or was this an MME?
This was a single bullet. So good for this.
Yeah.
You know what he probably did? This is probably just his fantasy team. I used to do that sometimes in DFS. I would just be like, all right, this is my fantasy team. I'm going to enter a lineup if I can afford it, with just like my season-long fantasy team, put that into a DFS contest. I wonder if that's what this guy did.
Was this the standard Millie or was this the more expensive one?
This is a standard Millie.
Wow. Okay. I mean, you could look at it and it's like, hey, you could just swap out Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis or Devonta Smith or whatever, right, and it would have got there. Plus with Josh Allen and his mobility, he with the rushing upside, maybe it's not as necessary, but this was definitely a surprise to me. In terms of like who was played though, I think this makes a ton of sense. You and I were both on Josh Allen as the best QB play at ownership. Kyren Williams was my favorite running back play at ownership. We talked about Calvin Ridley. We talked about the cheat code of make a rule, 1 Texans wide receiver on every lineup. Freiermuth was one of my favorite tight end plays of the slate. Ramondre, he was popping as a value, wasn't super on him. Rashee Rice, I missed. I did not get Rashee Rice, but shout out to John Proctor, who works with me at Fantasy Points, and Darren Manser, who does our ownership projections. Both of them were on Rashee. It just made so much sense. Yep. Justin Watson chalk. It's like, why not play the only wide receiver who's actually been consistently decent? So that was a really sharp play I wasn't on. But yeah, I last week was an awesome week. Fantasy Points crushed a number of people with making 15K or 30K. Really profitable week. Our guy Darren Manser was in the top 5 of the Millie up until overtime. Another guy played the engaged 8 and had like everything in the top 1%, and his best lineup would have outscored this lineup by like 15 points, which seems impossible. Yeah. So massive week. The one thing that stands out to me from last week though is, this is the Outside the Box podcast, and we were so inside the box. I thought Jonathan Taylor was going to be uber chalky, so I played a lot more Kyren and a lot more Derrick Henry. But then Jonathan Henry was more owned than Taylor, and like if I knew that heading in, I would have played so much more Taylor, and really got lucky there because Taylor had that injury impacting his usage in the second half. I really think he would have smashed if that didn't happen. And so a lot of things that we thought would be somewhat contrarian were chalk, and a lot of things we thought would be chalk weren't really that chalky.
Yeah, I mean, Kyren still was only 18%. So I mean, we played a ton of Kyren in the lineups that we made on the show last week. I know Kyren was like the place that we wanted to start in most of them. I think I had to force us to make a lineup without Kyren because he was getting into all of our lineups. Just looked so good at 6,600. And that, of course, worked out for us playing Kyren. But yeah, we would have played probably Kyren with Jonathan Taylor a little bit more if we weren't expecting Taylor to be so chalky last week. I loved Stevenson last week. I played a lot of Rashee Rice, actually, a ton of Nico Collins. Unfortunately, I only had 1 share of Pat Freiermuth last week, Scott, which was a miss on my part. Like we
was that the lineup we built?
It was the lineup that we built, which I have in front of me, and that's so we ended up 617th place. So I think we entered 3 or 4 lineups last week, and one of them finished 617th out of like 180,000 entries. So we had a Gardner, and this is the funny part. We had a Gardner Minshew stack. Minshew only put up 15.64 fantasy points. We paired him with Michael Pittman, who did pretty well, 23.7, and Josh Downs, who scored 9.3. So our stack was not great last week. But then we had Kyren Williams, Isaiah Pacheco put up 26 fantasy points. Mike Evans put up 25 fantasy points for us. We had Freiermuth at tight end putting up 24, and we had Devonta Smith, who we talked about a lot last week. We were very much on.
Can you show this on the screen? Is it up or no?
So that's what I was saying to start. Is I am not good at using the search function here. And I can't find how to scroll down to 617. So apologies, not going to put up on the screen. But then we also had Chiefs defense in there. They only put up 2 fantasy points. So yeah, we ended up 617th place. Pretty awesome. We also maybe would have had a better week if we hadn't built for the expectation that Rachaad White was going to miss the game. So we had Chase Edmonds in multiple of our lineups that I had to go back and swap off. But ultimately, we had a great week last week in terms of our lineups. But we have limited time, as we said at the start.
Right.
So I think we should move on to this week. I will say, the one final note for last week is the Stokastic tools absolutely loved Rams stacks last week, and we got so much pushback all week. Why would you play the Rams? Matthew Stafford hasn't put up 20 fantasy points all year. And I feel like we got a little bit unlucky because he threw 2 touchdowns to Tyler Higbee, who was not my favorite play. And then he threw, I think, 1 to Kyren and 1 to the other running back. Might have been 2 to Kyren. Yeah, I don't know. It's just so like the Matthew Stafford part absolutely worked out, but the stacking didn't quite work out with the way that I was hoping it would last week. All right. Let's get back and let's start talking about this slate. We'll start with our top stacks, and we'll start with the chalkiest quarterback on the slate. Chalkiest.
Maybe we can switch things up a little bit this week.
Sure.
So I reached out to some friends across the industry, like prepping for this podcast. I talked to JM to Win, talked to El Jefe, talked to, of course, John Proctor, and a few other people. And it's like, if I told you with 100% certainty that Tyreek Hill would be 75% owned this week and Zach Moss would be 85% owned, like, how would you play that? And I kept getting a lot of different answers. And so like, this is the outside the box podcast. And so like, we really need to talk about what I think are going to be the 2 chalkiest players of the slate. I don't know what your ownership projections are, but ours are 55% for Zach Moss and then like 28% for Tyreek Hill. And I think that's low. I think he's going to be like 30% in the milli and like way above that in small field stuff. And so what do you do there? And this is where I struggle. Like, my job is to like know who the best plays are. It's not to like fit them together, play with strategy. It's just not my strong suit, which is where you excel.
So you had posed this question to me, and I didn't answer you totally seriously. I gave it like literally 2 seconds thought, and then you sent me the response you got from El Jefe, and you were like, "This is a good response." I was like, "Yeah, that is a good response. Much better than the response, much more thoughtful than the response that I gave you."
So I'm going to hear. I want to hear your response, but let me just the ways I'm thinking about it. With Zach Moss, I know I've done the studies that the cheap running back chalk is the strongest chalk. Like, it really does not flop all that often, especially when it's a running back we think is good, a running back thrust into a bell cow workload due to injury. And it's like, the argument is Zach Moss is easily the best value we've had all year. He's top 5 in every site's projections, just raw projections. And then he's priced like the RB 30. So, JM to Win, his response is more along the lines of, well, like, he doesn't get a ton of passing down usage. And so that kind of archetype is fairly fragile. Like, he could get scripted out of the game. And so the way I'm thinking about it, I know this is outside the box, but it's just like, I think I'm going to have 80% Zach Moss, something like that. But then on the 20% of lineups, I don't have Zach Moss. I'm going to be playing a Michael Pittman, Derrick Henry mini stack, where it's like, what's the situation where he doesn't hit? It's okay. Tennessee actually has a lead, so he's scripted out. How did he have a lead? Probably through Derrick Henry, just pounding the rock. And he's not a bad play. He has a great matchup, and he's so game script sensitive. But like, the script is, negative, but it's fairly close. And then that forces Minshew to pass instead of lean on the run. What do you think about that before we move on to Tyreek?
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense to pivot to Minshew stacks with Pittman. I will say, like, so what we have projected for Zach Moss's ownership is 38%. What do we have it at? 37.8%. So we have Zach Moss essentially 38% projected ownership. At that level of ownership, I'm willing to play some Zach Moss. You gave the hypothetical, if you know he's going to be 70 or 80% owned, I would full fade Zach Moss if I knew he was going to be 70 to 80% owned. I understand, like, yes, cheap running backs, the best, the least likely to flop. But if you're in the Millie Maker contest in particular, in that contest, I'm playing to win.
Right.
I'm not, or to get to the top 1%, give myself a shot. I'm not just playing to not flop. Now, it's likely that if 70% of the field has Zach Moss. He's going to end up being in the Millie Maker winning lineup. But you give yourself such a better chance in that scenario. If you were that highly owned, you give yourself such a better chance by fading that type of chalk. And you can see, looking at the Stokastic tools, we have him optimal 41% of the time. So currently we have positive leverage on Zach Moss. If we had, I think you said fantasy points as like 53% going to Zach Moss, then he would be negatively leveraged in terms of his odds of being optimal. You'd want to be underweight to the field. It would be my approach. It's a tough question because Zach Moss is pretty unlikely to completely tank your lineups, like to put up, what would you do at 4,600 to completely tank your lineups, 7 and or fewer fantasy points. I don't know what the number is exactly, but if you're playing to win, I think that there's a lot of scenarios where Zach Moss puts up somewhere between 10 and 14 or 15 fantasy points, in which case I don't really mind not having him. I have more shots at getting 3 running backs or 2 running backs and a flex who each put up 25 to 30. And maybe just in terms of raw points, even though, 12 fantasy points is great from a point per dollar standpoint, you're playing against, 70% of the field having those 12 points. I'd rather not play Zach Moss in those scenarios. Now, it's always lineups, play lineups, not plays, essentially, like worry more about your lineups as a whole, as opposed to individual plays. But if I knew Zach Moss was going to be 70+% owned in the Millie, I would full fade him. It's also a different question for different contest types. Like the Millie is 200,000 people, whereas if you're playing a contest with 20 to 30,000, I think that's a little bit of a different equation for me. It's a little bit easier to win without hitting like the absolute nuts, getting everything particularly right, exactly right. So in that kind of contest, I think I'd be a little bit more likely to play Zach Moss. I think, yes, it does make sense what you're saying, like to pivot off Zach Moss to the other players on the Colts. But I also think, like, just at some point he is too highly owned, and maybe 38% according to our tools is not too highly owned. 53% would be slightly negatively leveraged, but still, we ran this experiment on my last show with Greg Scott, and Greg had the Sims assume that Zach Moss is going to be actually 70% was the number that he used, and he still got him in just about every lineup. So what I'm saying is actually counter to what the tools are saying in that sense. Like he would be over owned according to optimal odds, but still you'd want him in virtually all your lineups. So
as Sims gain dominance across the industry, it does make sense to focus more on theory, and you could say, hey, 70% owned. So if this one guy gets hurt on the first play, or if he just doesn't get there, we've seen, top 5 plays, like really strong, Austin Eckler score single digit fantasy points. And so then you just immediately wipe out 70% of your competition. Like they're guaranteed to not have, a perfect lineup. So huge edge there. This one's really tricky for me. Again, it would just be on my non-Moss lineups. I want to be smart about how I'm playing against him, which to me would be Pittman or Henry or both.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I will say, I also, and I might be biased because of my passing, but like one of my more memorable slates was a couple weeks after I won the Millie. So I was like ready to just be completely weird. Mike Davis was uber chalk for the Panthers.
I remember
and I faded. I full faded across 150 lineups. I full faded Mike Davis on that slate, and that is the second closest, the second best sweat, obviously after my actual win. My second best sweat to winning the Millie was just full fading Mike Davis and letting my lineups come out. Seeing what I would get without him, and I ended up with a lot of Cole Beasley, which, so maybe I'm biased because it happened to work out that slate that the super contrarian cheap guy that I got instead was a guy that did really well on that slate, and that was just the Stokastic projections really liked Cole Beasley that week, worked out well for me. So maybe I'm a little bit biased in my approach to this, but in general, I just think a 70% owned player who clearly has paths to fail, like he is facing a Titans defense that is better against the run. There are ways for Zach Moss to not work out, and I think if he's going to be 70% at that point, I would rather not play him personally. But it's an interesting discussion. I'm glad you brought him up because, as I said, really interesting that the Sims still jam him even at 70% ownership. Very, very interesting there.
So back to Tyreek, Johnny Proctor works with me at Fantasy Points, has had this rule for a long time, and he worked out really well for him. Is like, he just never fades the guy with bury you upside with like 40 point plus upside. When he's chalk, it's just like, no, I'm at an absolute minimum. I'm even to the field, but I probably come over that. I mean, that's Tyreek. And that's what JM said as well. He's like, Tyreek would probably be, I'd feel more comfortable locking in Tyreek than I would Zach Moss, because a good game for him is like 50 points, and a bad game for him in this matchup is like 28 points. And it's really, really hard to argue with that. The only thing I'll say is there's just so many pieces from this game that I love. Everyone wants to play Tyreek, who's having the best wide receiver season in NFL history. That's not an exaggeration in my estimation, in the best possible matchup. But you know what? Jalen Waddle has the exact same matchup. In some ways, it's even better. It's a schematic matchup that better suits his skill set. And he's so underrated. We've been talking about it for a number of weeks. And then there's Devon Achane, who is easily one of my favorite plays of the entire slate. The entire field is whiffing on this. He is 100% healthy. This is what Mike McDaniel said earlier in the week. He practiced all of last week. They said they weren't going to play him until he was 100% healthy. He's 100% healthy. They're going to play him. Insane upside. He's had 3 games. He averages 30 plus DK fantasy points per game in those games. You're showing 0.4% ownership. Raheem Mostert, it's the same thing. Only one running back has scored more fantasy points this year than Raheem Mostert, and that's Christian McCaffrey. Stack him with Miami's defense. That's insane leverage. But realistically, all of these guys can hit together. And so there's that too. So this is one I just really struggle with. I love the idea of leverage. It's just also like really hard for me to imagine Tyreek doesn't score 36.9 DraftKings fantasy points this week.
Yeah, and it's really hard to see Tyreek not working out. But I do like, we see this all the time where it's like he is in the nut matchup. But you said the exact reason that, like, I'm not going to go too crazy there is because so are every other player on Miami. Like, and who says it needs to happen through the air? Maybe they just score 5 rushing touchdowns. Like, we've seen that already with the Dolphins this year, and they have the talent there with Mostert. They have Achane. Maybe Jeff Wilson is involved now too. So there are ways for Tyreek to not completely bust the slate at 9,600. You could put up, 90 yards and 8 catches for 90 yards, and you're happy if you don't have him in that scenario if he doesn't score a touchdown. So like, there are ways for Tyreek to have a good game in real life, put up nice stats that you don't want to have at 9,600. So it sounds like you're saying that you would rather fade Zach Moss than Tyreek. Is that what you're saying? Like, if you were going to fade one of them?
No. I mean, I'm just struggling with it, but okay. Yeah, I would probably have more Moss than Tyreek, just because I like the ways to get unique against Tyreek more. But like, okay. Let's stick to the macro side of things. I wish like DraftKings offered a version of this slate without Miami on it.
Sure.
Because
that would be interesting.
Yeah, because if that were the case, like, I feel amazing about my article this week. Like, I could crush that slate. But with Miami on it, my inclination is to just like onslaught Miami. Like, I don't know, they have a 29.5 point implied total. I don't know if that's the highest of the season, but like, the odds of Miami scoring 50 points this week, 48 points, it feels like higher than any other game we've seen thus far. And I just think they go nuclear. And this has worked for us so many times, is the Miami onslaught, which can easily include running backs. Like, you don't worry. This is something Hefe said as well. You don't worry so much about correlation when it's a team scores 5 touchdowns. Like, quarterback stack with running backs works in that scenario. And we've seen that from Miami. There was the Denver game. Obviously everyone knows full well, but Tua had the 3-point bonus, 4 passing touchdowns. Waddle was out in that game, and Tyreek had a good game, like not a slate breaking game. It was like 8 catches, 169 yards and a score. And then Raheem Mostert had 4 touchdowns. Achane had like 250 yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns. And it's like, we could easily see that happen again. Like, or what if it's just the exact same game, except now Waddle steals like 60 yards from Tyreek. I don't know. I just, again, like, we've talked about it too. Onslaughts are plus EV because they're not played as often as they should be, and they seem to be overrepresented in terms of 1% lineups.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Like, that is another way to play, is instead of just playing like Tua with Tyreek, play Tua with Tyreek and Waddle and Mostert, and that there are different ways you can play it. The full onslaught. You're right. We have seen it work out more often than people play it this year, so that is definitely a way that you can play the slate. Do you care that Jack Del Rio has been fired? Does that affect your desire to play Miami at all?
Yeah, I've thought about it. There's like the argument that, oh, there's more motivation, like, which, you know, might be true if they didn't like Jack Del Rio. That's not obvious to me. JDR was always like a guy I would call had scheme stubbornness, where, like, I remember in years past, it was like his defense sucked ass against tight ends, and he didn't do anything to remedy that, and you just targeted tight ends against them all year. The thing I'll say, though, is, like, Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach, and I imagine he had plenty of oversight, and this is just a scapegoat hire, and this is probably going to be the same defense, so it probably doesn't matter. Yeah. But yeah, that's something you can think about, and it injects more uncertainty into the projection.
Yeah, I hate adding variables to smash spots because it's such a smash spot. Without that, sure, they could be even worse after firing Jack Del Rio. But it's just adding a new variable.
Hard to be worse, though.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's just a variable that I would prefer not to add there. It's at least something to think about. It's possible that Washington, you know, plays a little bit better without him. Maybe it was a schematic thing, as you say. Maybe it was a motivation thing. Just something at least worth noting, that they did fire their defensive coordinator, so things could be changing in Washington a little bit. All right, I think, is that a good enough macro breakdown? We've gone over halfway through our time for the show. I think it was a really important discussion, so I'm glad we had it. And we also, the Stokastic pushed an update while we were having that conversation, so that was helpful for us. Should we start? Do you want to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end?
Yeah.
Real quick. All right, let's just start with all right. So we have Tua getting 10% ownership, 20% chance of being the top stack. Looks like a smash for us. He is still the highest owned player, quarterback on the slate for us. Followed by, we have Russell Wilson 9%, Brock Purdy 9%. Any thoughts on these chalkier quarterbacks?
Yeah, again, I really wish DraftKings removed this game from the slate. But because they didn't, I'm just going to be super heavy it. So I'm going to have more than 10% Tua for sure. I'm also going to have a lot of Howell, because we know that opposing quarterbacks are positively correlated. And, you know, Howell's been like a fantasy machine. He's exceeded 20 DK in 5 straight games. He's the 4th most games of 20 plus. He's shown a high ceiling. We know they're going to go insanely pass heavy. You could stack him with Curtis Samuel, maybe McLaurin, maybe Logan Thomas. I do prefer Curtis Samuel, but really I would just stack him with only one Washington receiver and like possibly 0 on some lineups, but then heavy exposure to Miami, where he's just basically a way that lets me fit those Miami players better or more easily than with Tua.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I would ever go with 0 stack partners with Howell, but otherwise I'm right there with you. I think it makes a lot of sense to play that game and, you know, stack up the Miami.
I mean, they just spread the ball around so much, is like, we're just not really seeing spike weeks from any of these guys that I think it's possible. And like Miami, there's been so many instances where the optimal is 0 bring back.
True. Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely have plenty of lineups that have Miami with no Washington bring back. I'm just saying, with if I play Sam Howell, I prefer to stack him with at least one.
He also has a rushing component to him as well. But
True. Yeah. But just for the sake of, you know, fewer things you need to get right.
You're right.
The same conversation we've had a few times. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Playing some Howell. What is your level of interest in either quarterback in the San Francisco Philly game?
Yeah, pretty high. I think if you removed Miami, Washington from the slate, then for sure that would be those two quarterbacks would probably be my favorites, or they would
Okay.
be my favorites.
All right. Let me see if
Russ, I think, is bad chalk. I don't get it. The guy averages. All right, nice.
Although Judy looked pretty good in our tools, looks like he's not getting a ton of ownership. So I guess
that's the best argument for him is like Judy and Sutton are popping as values, but it's also like neither wide receiver has produced a GPP winning score yet. And Russell Wilson averages 169 passing yards per game since week 5. So with like 0 spike weeks over that span. So
what about any interest in Kenny Pickett against this Arizona defense?
You know what? I wrote him up and then I deleted it from my article. Like he just missed the cut. But I liked the argument I made for him, which was obviously he just threw for the second most passing yards in his career. Pittsburgh eclipsed 400 yards from scrimmage. That was more than anything ever in the Matt Canada level. And then it's like a best possible matchup, and their implied point total is 36% higher than their average points per game. So if there's ever a week to ever play Kenny Pickett, it would be this. Argument against him is he's never had a good fantasy game in his career. But I get it. He bubbled for me, but I get it.
Yeah, definitely. It's the right matchup if he's ever going to. I think that's a pretty good synopsis of the Kenny Pickett situation. Just in the interest of time, rather than asking you about several, I'll just open it up to you. Any other quarterbacks that you have a lot of interest in this week?
I wouldn't say a lot of interest, but I'm surprised you didn't bring up Jared Goff. Just that seems like a Neil play. Second highest implied point total of the slate.
Yeah.
Drawing.
We've got nice leverage on Jared Goff, so he does make sense from that standpoint.
Yeah, and then I also like CJ Stroud. I get that the matchups,
I do too,
not amazing, but he's just been producing at a Dakian level since the team leaned more pass heavy. And it's just been like the top cheat code is like play at least one Houston wide receiver, maybe 2. No Dalton Schultz this week. I also like Gardner Minshew just because I think like Downs and Pittman are insanely good plays. Like I'd much rather play him, dub stacks of him than dub stacks of Russ.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you can see her. I mean, you're bringing up CJ Stroud looks great in our tools, 7.5% ownership, 10% chance to be in the top stack. Goff looks great at 6% ownership, 8.5% chance to be in the top stack. And then we have actually Derek Carr looks really good for us, 4.1% ownership, 7.1% chance to be in the top stack. A little bit tough with Carr. I think Olave is going to play, but it's not a sure thing.
I'm pretty sure he plays.
Okay. But still, we're missing our guy, Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah. Carr, I'm never going to play. I get it. Like the matchup's amazing. Maybe these injuries makes like a secondary stacking option cheap, but yeah, he's played on only 60% of the team snaps inside the red zone over the last 4 weeks. He's also like not good, and he hasn't shown a ceiling in years. So I can't get there, but I get it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, we just in the interest of time, I feel like we've talked about the best quarterback plays on the slate. Are you ready to move on to running backs?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. Pulling up running backs for the main slate. We already talked a good amount about Zach Moss, so let's move on to the second chalkiest running back. Actually, let's talk about the second, third, and fourth, I guess, together. So let's talk about Christian McCaffrey, Rachaad White, Javonte Williams. How much interest do you have in that trio?
Yeah, McCaffrey is an awesome play. He also works as a pivot off of Tyreek, although a lot of lineups are going to be trying to fit both. Not really much to say about CMC. He's just a god, and I love him, and he's the man. Yeah. Rachaad White, I think 26% for tournaments is a little rich. I think that's an easier fade. Obviously, you're playing him in cash. He's finished as a top 13 running back by DraftKings fantasy points in 6 straight weeks, but he's finished top 8 only once over that span. So you can quibble with the upside there and say he's not really a great tournament play. Javonte Williams, I think, is a legitimately bad play at this ownership. I've been saying for a number of weeks now, he's basically Sean Payton's Mark Ingram, which means in games Denver leads throughout and by like a decent margin, he should be like a low end RB1, really good upside. In all other scenarios, like he's probably going to flop. And so in a game, they're underdogs by 3. I think he's an easy fade.
Ramondre Stevenson against the Chargers defense, which has not been great. Ramondre Stevenson, one of the few bright spots for the Patriots. I mean, I guess that's an overstatement. Any interest in Ramondre Stevenson against the Chargers?
Yeah, I like him more this week than I've liked in any other week, but like 17% is still pretty high.
Yeah.
Zeke's banged up. He got a huge usage bump last week. Maybe it was because of the Zeke injury, but it was basically like equivalent to Rachaad White. The usage he saw last year when Damian Harris was banged up, the usage you were hoping for when you spent an offseason draft pick on him. Argument against him is like this offense is broken and there's like no touchdown upside. But I think he's fine. Breece Hall, it's the same thing. It's like easily lowest implied point total to slate. Offense appears broken. He's also averaging only 30 rushing yards per game over his last 6 games. But yeah, maybe he's shown good upside this season. It's just like inconsistent production. Maybe he breaks off a long run. I'm not excited about either of those names.
Okay. How about these Pittsburgh running backs? Obviously, elite matchup against Arizona. Jalen Warren, Najee Harris. We have actually positive leverage on Najee Harris, a little bit of negative leverage on Jalen Warren. But to me, against this Cardinals defense, running backs have just crushed them all season. Do you have any interest in either Warren or Harris or both?
Yeah, I like them. Our ownership was saying 15 for Warren versus 5 for Najee. And like, when we saw that, Johnny was like, well, now I'm just going to split them. But like, sans ownership, like obviously more excited to play Warren. If you're looking for an argument against them, it would be they're going to cannibalize each other's upside. It's hard to predict which one to play. But yeah, if there's ever a week to play them again, it'd be this week. Awesome matchup. Massive bump to the implied total. So yeah, not we haven't gotten to the guys who give me an erection, but
all right. So you want to talk about those Miami guys now? Is that so? That was I mean, you already kind of did talk about them. So maybe that's not what you're talking about. But when you asked me the question, who are we going to play if Tyreek and Zach Moss are crazy high owned, my immediate response was Mostert and Achane, and I gave it very little thought. But I really love both as plays this week, regardless of the fact that I didn't give it much thought before I answered your question. Are those the guys that give you an erection, or who makes you hard, Scott?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Priapism is what I'm suffering from with my excitement to play Devon Achane. He's played in only 3 full games. In those games, he averages an insane 154 yards from scrimmage, 32.1 fantasy points per game. You could say he's due for a regression, and that's true. He by my model, he pops as like the top regression candidate in years. But he also might just be the second coming of Chris Johnson. And I think that really could be the case. He looks untackleable, which is what Mike McDaniel has been saying, like watching him in practice, even the last few weeks when he's been banged up or supposedly banged up. Again, I think the DFS community, every podcast you're listening to is like, well, he's hard to trust because like we don't know that he's fully healthy. No, we know he's fully healthy. Mike McDaniel said earlier in the week, the only reason he was inactive is because I don't want to play him until I have full confidence in his health. He practiced all of last week, practiced all of this week. The guy is awesome, insane ceiling. After Tyreek, maybe he has like the second best ceiling or top 5 ceiling of any play of the slate. And the matchup's amazing. So Commanders, everyone talks about the Commanders pass funnel, which is true. Maybe it matters a little bit less when the Dolphins are 10-point favorites. But since they traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat, they gave up a season high 23 fantasy points for Ramondre Stevenson, 30 to the Seahawks. That was the second most all season, 30 to Saquon Barkley. That was a season high. And then 31.9 to the Cowboys. That was a season high. And that was every game they played against running backs. Nuts matchup. This is just like an insane cheat code. Mike McDaniel's a god. His system works. Achane is awesome at it. Raheem Mostert, I like less than Achane for sure. But he works better, I think, as leverage, especially if stacked with Miami's defense, which I think is like a great play. He's the RB2 by fantasy points. The implied point total is insane. The spread works in his favor. The matchup's good. I don't know. I love these guys.
So I guess I'm the opposite of you in terms of who I like. So I prefer Mostert at over HN, just given the ownership. Since neither of them are getting steam, I'd rather go with the guy that I'm more confident is going to get the playing time. But I mean, you obviously laid out a great case for HN. I'm going to be, if they come in anywhere under 5% owned, I'm going to be well over the field on both Mostert and HN. So I'm nitpicking a little bit, but I have a slight preference for Mostert over HN. At this, if neither of them are getting ownership, I just go with the guy I think is more likely to get there.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring up do you think Jeff Wilson retains a role?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, if you're talking about the fourth quarter when they're ahead by 16 points, for sure. But I mean, like first half, I would say 0 snaps for Jeff Wilson, maybe one or two.
Okay. Interesting, because
part of it too is I think McDaniel's really excited to get A-Chain back. I think that it took something off the offense a little bit, and Mostert wasn't all that impressive to me without him. But we'll see.
Okay, yeah, I was considering, like, if he is going to retain a role, just as like maybe the strongest back of the three of them, maybe I'd have some interest in Jeff Wilson. I'm not sure that I'm going to get there at all. I don't even know what his price, like, we don't even have him in our tools. That's how little we're expecting from him.
I mean, there was that Denver game. It was like, what, Chris Brooks had a 80-yard touchdown or something.
Right. Yeah.
They're just so insane.
Yeah. All right. Any other running backs that you love that you want to talk about?
Yeah. There's one running back. I actually had him higher than HN 45 minutes ago, and then I flipped them. So now he's number 2 ahead of Mostert for me. Love him. Another priapism causing play, but I'm going to keep this one under wraps. You can read my article if you want to see that one, and I'll tell you
okay.
who it is. Yeah.
All right. So it's in Scott's article, which he has posted on Twitter. If you want to see his other very exciting play, any other running backs that you want to talk about before we move on to wide receivers?
No, not unless there's anyone you want to bring up specifically.
No, we've only got 10-15 minutes left, so we should
we could tack an extra 15 minutes on. I kind of went into the weeds with the macro thing.
Cool. Well, let's move on to wide receivers. I think that we've talked about the Miami guys were the ones that I really wanted to get your take on, because I'm really excited about playing those Miami running backs. Damn,
I'm pissed seeing this.
You're pissed seeing our ownership levels?
Chris Olave at 15%. Oh, I thought he was going to be sneaky. That breaks my heart.
He might still end up being sneaky. But yeah, we've got him at 15%, at which rate, yeah, he's not very sneaky at 15%. We have him slightly over-owned there. You're not going to love him at 15%?
No, I still will, but let me see what we were projecting for him. I can't find it, but yeah, we thought he was going to come in super low. I thought he was going to come in super low because you see that with like late week injury news guys. Like we haven't actually gotten positive word that he's going to come back. And so like, I really thought he could get slept on, but yeah, 15% is like probably what he should be. And I really thought it would be like, I don't know, 6% at max, maybe 4%, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, Shorty Vegas Picks says Olave won't be 15%. People move slow on questionable guys.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that might be true. Like maybe we're not factoring that in enough. So who knows? Maybe he comes in a little bit lower owned than we have him, but it doesn't seem that far off from what I would expect for Olave. 15% seems about right. All right, so you like Olave. You already talked about liking Pittman as a pivot off of Zach Moss. We talked about Tyreek Hill. We talked about all the chalky guys, really. And you even talked about Josh Downs already. What about actually Keenan Allen? Do you have much interest in Keenan Allen here?
Not really at 11%. I was thinking he would come in lower than that, but yeah, he makes sense as a pivot off of Tyreek, but I do definitely prefer Tyreek, but given my fondness of all the other Miami options, yeah, that would make sense as a lineup to build, for sure.
What about the Philly guys? So I know we've seen Devontae Smith has been great recently. Actually, let me sort by salary is what I meant to do. Devontae Smith has been great recently. We have him coming in at 4% ownership. We have AJ Brown coming in at 8%. What's your level of interest in either or both of them?
Yeah, definitely sky high upside for AJ Brown. He has a great schematic matchup. Unfortunately, everything else is popping in Devonta Smith's favor. San Francisco ranks top 6 in pressure rate, top 6 in average time to throw allowed, top 6 in completion percentage allowed on deep targets. That really works against AJ Brown, who's super reliant on deep production. His splits with Jalen Hurts, pressured versus non-pressured, like some of the craziest splits I've ever seen. He really needs Hurts to have time in the pocket for his routes to develop further down the field. Devonta Smith has also like been the clear wide receiver one in games without Dallas Goedert. So I'd prefer him at lower ownership and a cheaper price tag. I just don't know that he offers slate breaking upside, but it's a good matchup. It's a good fringe top 10 matchup, and the game environment's awesome.
Yeah. What about Ayuk against this Philly secondary? Is that coming in at 7% ownership? We have him optimal 12.5% of the time. Any interest there?
Yeah. This is kind of another one that was tricky for me. Like amazing matchup, easy top 3 matchup. Matchup in my estimation is much better for him than it is Debo. I also think he's better than Debo. So he would be my clear lean. I just don't have a ton of confidence in it because he's averaging 4.3 targets per game since Debo Samuel return. He's averaging like 20 DraftKings fantasy points per game, but like that's kind of crazy. Really spreading the ball around since Samuel came back. I like Kittle a lot. I think he's getting slept on. I like his upside. I don't know. I could see him breaking the slate. I could see that for sure. I do think he's better than Debo. But there's if I'm making 3, I don't know. There's just other wide receiver plays I have more confidence in. But I can't say anything negative about Ayuk.
All right. Well, let me open it up to you. Who do you have confidence in? Who do you want to play? And I'm sorted by salary right now. Is that what you want, or do you want me to sort by ownership?
There's a lot of wide receivers I can bring up. Well, did I do a good enough job selling Jalen Waddle? Because
that's a good point. And that was I told you that I was going to be sheepish after Ricky D's tweet about touts always wanted to say Jalen Waddle is great leverage. It is true though, and I still believe that it's true, despite the fact that we've been saying it every week. It's worked out a couple times. Do you want to add to Jalen Waddle outside of just good leverage on Tyreek and a great matchup?
Yeah, it's not even the leverage so much. It's just like I could easily see them both smashing, or like Tyreek hitting and Waddle somehow outscoring him. Everyone wants to play Tyreek because of this nuts matchup. Waddle has the exact same matchup. It's a better schematic matchup. We've been saying it's the same schematic matchup he had last week, except now it's the best possible matchup instead of the worst. Like Jets are the best against wide receivers. Washington's the worst. And he had a team high over Tyreek, 114 yards on just a 66% snap share. He ranks top 3 among all players in XFP per route run. You can't look at the full season numbers without making that adjustment because he's left some games early with injury. So I like him. I think we need to talk about Texans wide receivers. That's just been the ultimate cheat code since at least week 9 is make a rule, min 1 Texans wide receiver every single lineup. And you could play 2 as well. Over the last 4 weeks, Texans wide receivers have finished, at least 2 Texans wide receivers have finished top 24 in all 4 of those games, top 12 in 2 of those games. And so Nico Collins, Tank Dell, what's the ownership? It's kind of tight, right? What's tricky about this is that Patrick Surtain could shadow one of them and could just totally neutralize or at least kneecap the upside of that one player while the other one goes off. And we don't really know at all who that would be. Tank Dell is seriously banged up with a calf injury. I'm told he'll play. He's a tough guy. He'll grit it out, but definitely not at 100%. That makes me want to give the lean to Nico Collins. Per sources, Noah Brown will play,
Okay.
but he didn't do anything at practice on Friday, which leaves me a little nervous. You know me, I wanted to go all in him because like everyone's forgetting about the guy who's led the Texans in receiving yards in 3 straight games. And not only that, but in each of his last 2 games, he ranked top 2 among all wide receivers in receiving yards. He cleared 150 in both games, and no one wants to play him. What I will say, though, is, again, barely practiced on Friday, will play. Don't know how banged up he is. Broncos are really good against the slot. Also, those games came with like some injuries, so we don't know how that impacts.
Has Noah Brown ever done it in a game where both Tank Dell and Nico Collins are both active?
No, but now Dalton Schultz is also out.
Oh, good point.
Tank Dell is banged up. Patrick Surtain could just, shadow and negate Nico Collins. So there's definitely some uncertainty there, but you're talking about what, a player who's going to be 3% owned, who has 150 yards in each of his last 2 games.
Right.
And this is the cheat code. It's make a rule. Like it's tough for me to tell you who the best, I'll lean Nico, but make a rule.
Okay. I do want to talk about these New Orleans receivers. People have been asking who to play from the Saints with some players banged up. And this is an interesting note from Demod Bowler. Saints beat writer just reported that Callaway and Prentice are being elevated for tomorrow. Looks like Olave will come down to the last minute to get cleared. Yeah, could be. Olave, as we discussed, definitely in play. Any secondary, tertiary Saints receivers that you have interest in?
Yeah, A.T. Perry's viable, but I prefer Greg Dortch, Elijah Moore, Jalen Guyton. But he's there. I wouldn't play him if Olave was back. I would bump Kamara if Olave was out. I like his upside. Sure. Didn't mention in the running back section, but there's a few running backs I like. I just wouldn't get too excited, but I would get really excited for Olave if he plays.
Okay. One player who's popping in our stuff is Jason Brownlee, who is Stone Min. We have him at 0.1% ownership with a 6.8% chance of being optimal. I think he ran routes on like 97% of drop back, something like that. Last week he was, let me see. Yeah, 97.8% route participation last week. Only saw 2 targets in that game. Any interest in Jason Brownlee?
Yeah, no, not on a guy who has 4 catches all year, tied to Tim Boyle, but I get it.
True.
There's lineups I made where I was like, oh, I wish there was a 3K wide receiver. He would fit perfect. And he's definitely the best 3K wide receiver.
Okay.
Like Stone minimum wide receiver.
Right. Anybody else? Adam Thielen, any interest there?
Yeah, I legitimately like Adam Thielen. I've been talking about this for a number of weeks now. So over his last 5 weeks, he's averaging 10 fantasy points per game. Over the previous 6, he was fantasy's wide receiver 1, 24.7 fantasy points per game. What's changed? Not his target share. It's barely budged. It's 25.5 down from 28.1. What the biggest catalyst behind this decline in production, I think, is a really tough strength of schedule. By schedule adjusted allowed, he's faced the 13th toughest, 7th toughest, 9th toughest, and 3rd toughest schedule adjusted matchups for a slot wide receiver to face. And so that's not great. The good news is this week he has a best possible matchup. Buccaneers are giving up the most schedule adjusted to slot wide receivers, also the 6th most to wide receiver 1. So he'll spend most of his day against UDFA rookie named Christian Isian. He went to Rutgers, and I didn't know who he was until a couple of weeks ago. So great matchup. There's definitely some uncertainty here because he had a neutral matchup last week and he really flopped. He had 3 targets, 1.2 fantasy points. This offense just might be broken. Bryce Young might just totally stink. But I like him as a contrarian play for sure.
Yeah, I think he makes a lot of sense to me as a contrarian play. Let me see if there's any others that I really want your any interest in. Jameson Williams, where the coach is saying the ball is going to gravitate towards him more.
Our projections really like him. There's definitely upside there. He's in college, he was profiling as one of the best deep threats to come out in a number of years. He has that speed, that big play ability. I get it for sure. I I have players in that range I'm more excited about, like Elijah Moore and Greg Dortch.
Okay, yeah. So Elijah Moore playing with Joe Flacco once again. How much interest in Elijah Moore do you have?
I posted in the article the X-Files I want to believe poster, because I've just been like Elijah Moore's biggest supporter since before he came out of college. And yeah, so he hit 37.9 DK fantasy points in that one start with Flacco, and then decent volume last year. And then honestly, this year, like the past 4 games, he's averaging like 8 targets and like 2 carries per game. He's just not seeing catchable targets. And so with Amari Cooper banged up in a tough matchup, maybe he gets the work. I don't know. It's one of those plays where like you could check my article to see where he ranks, but I don't know how much of that is just, me wanting to believe. So you don't have to tell me on that. Greg Dortch, at least, like he's another guy where I've been like pounding the table since before he came out of college. He's good at football, but at least like him, like he's produced this season and last season, unlike Elijah.
Yeah, Elijah Moore, 9 targets last week. I think it said he had 3 receptions. Greg Dortch, who we actually played last week, also had 9 targets and 3 receptions. So both of them targeted heavily last week. Maybe this week it comes to.
Well, Dortch did have like an absolutely brutal matchup last week, but and this week it's better.
What about the Steelers? Any interest in Pickens or Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, I really like Deontay. Like just based on the numbers, recent volume, and the matchup, I really like him. Obviously, there's uncertainty there because like I'm sure you saw that the fumble where he just like stared at it and then watched the defender pick it up and run. He could just be totally in the doghouse or something, but yeah, I like him. I think he's a fringe cash play. In this matchup, he would have scored like 19.5 fantasy points if they challenged that one end zone target.
Wow. Okay. All right. Any other wide receivers you want to talk about?
Don't sleep on Marquise Brown. Curtis Samuel, good value. Yeah, again, really like Pittman and Downs. Pittman more for tournaments, probably. Actually, it's really close. Yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown, like, I don't know. He's up there, but probably won't play him.
Okay. All right, let's move on to tight ends, which honestly, I was having trouble figuring out who I love this week. I think I'm going to be pretty spread out at tight end this week. But let's see. Let's hear if you have anybody that you're going crazy over. We have 3 over 10% ownership: Njoku, McBride, Logan Thomas. What do you think of the chalk here?
Yeah, I think that's solid. I think Brevin Jordan should be like probably 25%, to be honest.
Oh, really? Okay. So you have, I mean, where do we have him now? Because he was not, let me see. Where is Houston? Brevin Jordan. Okay. So we have not updated apparently for Brevin Jordan. I know maybe I just need to refresh because we did an update and that was one that I specifically was asking about. So I think maybe we're still working on what to do with Brevin Jordan. Let me see.
Yeah, per sources, he's going to be in the Dalton Schultz role for sure. Really? CJ Stroud really likes him, always speaks highly of him. They did connect for a touchdown earlier in the year. This is like a really valuable role. Like CJ Stroud just looks like the kingmaker, right? In terms of receivers. Schultz was tight end 5 since week 4. Like I said, Tank Dell's banged up, Noah Brown's banged up, Patrick Surtain could shadow and neutralize either one of those guys. It's a easy top 3 matchup for sure. He's a player my model loved. I don't know how much that matters because he looks like a bust, but he does have that. And yeah, he's the stone minimum. And so that feels easy to me on a week where there's a lot of players I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, we've got 11% ownership going to Brevin Jordan. Yeah, makes sense at the stone min. Maybe is he this week's Freiermuth for you?
Well, we could talk about Freiermuth as well, but Juwan Johnson should also be up there, probably above Njoku. I definitely prefer Brevin, and like especially if Olave returns, I would bump Juwan down. But massive route share jump last week, even before the wide receiver injuries. Got a lot of targets. And Njoku, yeah, I think like he's an awesome play. Flacco has historically like peppered the tight end position with targets, and like that's what Cleveland's been doing. He over the last 6 games, he had a 20% target share in all 6, 8.8 targets per game. He gets a top 5 matchup. Oh no, he gets like the best possible matchup. Rams are a massive tight end funnel. Trey McBride I like, but don't love as much as I have been. It's just he's been banged up. He also had a string of top 3 matchups. Now he gets a bottom 10 matchup. Logan Thomas, like he's a top XFP value every week. I just question the upside, and he doesn't at all excite me. I think we need to talk George Kittle. I think he's an amazing GPP play. You just like look at his production. I'm rounding to the nearest decimal here, but since week 3, 16, then 2, then 28, then 1, then 13, then 27, then 24, then 23, then 5 DraftKings fantasy points. So basically 33% chance he just destroys your lineup and you're dead. 55% chance he falls short of value, but a 44% chance like he finishes as the slate's tight end 1. And like you want to be leaning into that volatility, that upside for tournaments. Eagles way more vulnerable to wide receivers than tight ends, but it is a very favorable matchup for Kittle nonetheless. So I like him. And then let's talk Pat Freiermuth. Like, is it stupid to chase the points on a guy whose price just increased 1,400?
No, I don't think it is with a guy. I mean, after we saw how many targets did he have last week? 11 targets last week. Nut matchup against the Cardinals makes sense to me. The price increase. If the ownership were to shoot way up, then I would not have as much interest. But we've got him at 2.3%. Maybe he gets a little bit esteemed after we saw him get so many targets last week. Maybe that needs to come up a little bit. But even at like 5% ownership, I think Freiermuth would be a fine play. Do you agree?
Yeah, can you pull a tweet up? I just sent it to you in our private chat here. It's a good opportunity for me to promote one of our newer tools. And so if you read my article, you'll hear me talk about coverage shell matchups.
Where did you send this to me?
In the private chat in our
all right.
Sorry.
I'm looking on Twitter. Okay, hang on. Let me find it.
And so shout out to Adam Levitan who pulled this out of I don't know, I guess an ESPN article. But Pittsburgh's new OC said the plan, or Freiermuth actually said, the plan was to get him involved early and often Sunday, provided the Bengals were showing them the 2 high safety looks they'd seen on film. Are you still trying to? Oh, okay.
Yep.
And so against 2 high coverage last week, Freiermuth ran only 9 routes. He was targeted on 7 of those, had 80 yards just on 9 routes, 9 yards per route run. That's crazy. And so like, if that's real, like if you could scroll down to just show the Adam Levitan thing. Yeah. That's what straight from Freiermuth's mouth. And then this week, the nuts 2 high matchup, Arizona deploys 2 high at the 2nd highest rate in the league. So I really like Freiermuth. I think he's going to get slept on. Yeah, I mean, he just smashed right last week, and now it's like the perfect schematic matchup. And so this is like an edge for us because most other people aren't spending time digging into schematic matchups. But I like him as a GPP play a lot. I might like Kittle more still. I don't know, but
okay.
I mean, yeah. I like Brevin the most just because of how I'm building this week, but.
Any interest in a way too expensive, but maybe could break the slate, Taysom Hill?
Dude, I have nothing here. I just have to watch. He's just like such an enigma to me. He's just an outlier on every level that I just like struggle to comprehend him. He's awesome. He's so much fun, but from a DFS perspective, it's tough. He just seems like he's priced as though he's going to play quarterback for 6 drives, and that just never happens. But I mean, like massive touchdown upside. I talked about Carr losing red zone work, and he could be the goal line running back as well. And they're down receivers, and he's like honestly great as a receiver this year, at least on a per target basis. But yeah, I won't be chasing that, but I get it.
Yeah. Hill and Johnson would be interesting to double stack that. We just get multiple touchdowns thrown from Tyreek Hill to Juwan Johnson for the nuts. All right. Any other tight ends you want to talk about? People are talking about Adam Troutman, Ian Thomas. Any interest in these guys?
I'll be honest, I didn't even spend a second thinking about them.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to play either of them. But since chat brought them up, I figured I should at least throw the names out there. Yeah, I think we've talked about the more impactful. I mean, we're getting some Chigakonkwo in the Stokastic tools a little bit there.
He has a great schematic matchup this week. He popped there for me for sure. I think I wrote him up and then deleted it, but mildly in play.
Okay.
Laporta, you can make a case for Detroit's second highest implied total of the slate. Maybe he scores multiple touchdowns. I could see that.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Laporta.
Higbee scored twice last week, and Cubs banged up. I wouldn't play that, but I get it. Everett, legitimately decent play. All those injuries, decent touchdown upside. Didn't get a write up, but I get it. Durham Smythe, just a cheap way to fit on Tua stacks. I get it.
All right. Do you have time to build a lineup or
yeah, for sure.
All right. What we're going to build at least one lineup here.
Let's do two. We'll do one Miami and then we'll do maybe a Miami fade.
Okay. Love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We did our favorite stacks earlier on my last show, and I didn't say Miami because I figured I would leave that for Greg, and then he didn't say Miami either. I was like, oh, well, they really stand out in the tools as a great play. So let's start with the Miami stack. Are we doing an over stack here? Are we trying to do with Achane, with Hill, with Waddle, or what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I love that. You want to do Tyreek, Waddle, Achane, or do you want to do Mostert? You could pick your running back.
I mean, I prefer Mostert, but you prefer Achane, and I'm gonna build a lot of my own lineups later. So we might as well let's go with Achane. Let's go with the Achane full on stack. So now we only have 3,600 left per player. So
why don't you we could do Howell plus Samuel.
Well, let's start by filling in our defense. I kind of like the Miami defense this week too, just as an interesting play with Howell being with the defense getting better and also Howell being so sack prone. I think Miami defense is sort of interesting.
Oh, I'm with you. I think they're that love Mostert stack with Miami's defense. We can't afford that on this roster. But
yeah, we got to go cheaper here.
I mean, you could honestly. I was gonna say, I wonder if you could play Commanders and just hope they keep it competitive by a fluky special teams touchdown or something.
That's sort of interesting. Should we see what it allows us to do if we do that?
Yeah. Otherwise, Broncos defense is 400 is a lot. Yeah. Let's just keep it at the minimum.
All right,
and just see what we can build, and then we can move up. So Moss, I think you have to play.
Yeah, when we're funneled the cheap stuff, you absolutely have to play Moss. Oh yeah, Jeff Wilson's also 4,600. I was hoping he'd be the Stoneman.
Brevin's a must, or Smythe if you want to just go crazy. But I like Brevin more. I think.
Yeah, let's go Brevin here. All right, now we're back to 4,300. So we've successfully managed to play some cheap plays. Now at quarterback, we could play Judy, and then go for a.
No, I don't want to play Judy.
All right.
Noah's there. That fits our rule of min one Houston wide receiver.
And you say that you're hearing that he is going to play, even though he hasn't been practicing.
Yeah, he's for sure going to play. He didn't do a lot in practice on Friday. Maybe that's because they knew he was going to play, and he did enough the day before. Let's see.
Looks like we play Noah and Curtis Samuel if we wanted to.
Oh, dude, I like that. You want to just see what it looks like with Howell though, just to see.
We could do that and then put in a Commanders. Let's see.
Oh, he was literally DMP on Friday, but that could just mean he showed enough Wednesday and Thursday.
What is McLaurin's price tag?
I mean, I struggle with him.
55.
3 different Washington wide receivers have hit 90 receiving yards this year, and McLaurin wasn't one of them. He's had no upside. He's due. Like, I totally get that.
I mean, if you wanted to, we could swap out Noah Brown for Curtis Samuel, and then we could play somebody more expensive in the flex.
I mean, this works. This is a smart lineup. Like, there's credence to that he's due, and he is the wide receiver one by volume at least. But yeah, I think this is a great lineup. What was the Tua lineup?
So the Tua lineup, we were gonna have to go cheap at flex. I believe it was Curtis Samuel at flex. Let's see.
Yeah, I like that. I think I like that more.
I do too. Yeah, I think that
Okay.
for the full onslaught going, and we still have the bring back then with Curtis Samuel.
He's in a great matchup.
Wait, wasn't he 4,100?
Miami's somewhat funnelish to the slot.
Yeah, so this, I mean, we got the full-on Miami onslaught, Tua to Achane, Hill, Waddle. We got the Curtis Samuel bring back. We went cheap with Jordan, Noah Brown, Zach Moss, and then we got the Commanders defense, which obviously negative correlation with the full-on Miami onslaught, but they are the cheapest, so they're the only defense that fits in this lineup, so it has that benefit. And as you said, defensive touchdown, Miami immediately gets the ball back, and then they're in a better spot. So,
well, all right, here's what's going to happen. Ready for this?
Let's hear it.
Tua bomb to Tyreek, touchdown.
Yes.
They kick it off. Washington's returner scores a touchdown.
Perfect.
Next play, Tyreek bomb to Waddle. Next play, Washington's returner scores a touchdown. And then you just keep going that until Miami builds up a 21-point lead, and then Achane scores 5 touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah. Hopefully, Real Estate Steve, that answers your the theory behind the play. It's a little bit thin, the theory that we're going with the full onslaught against the defense.
I mean, it just lets you fit
Yeah.
better plays, and you can get lucky with a touchdown.
Yeah, exactly. All right,
which hopefully keeps the game more competitive for Tua to keep his foot on the gas. All right.
And then you want to do one more. And did you have something in mind for a second lineup you want to do together?
No, I figured let's just, like, for the viewers, let's do a Miami fade lineup.
Yes. Okay.
So I think we agreed it would be Hurts or Purdy as the next best quarterback, unless there's someone else. Stroud, Goff.
Yeah, I like Stroud. I like. I mean, Purdy is cheap. I think that makes sense. You go to Minshew. I think those lineups make some sense. We almost won. We got 617th with the Minshew lineup last week, so that's kind of interesting.
He works as a Moss leverage too.
I'd say let's go with Purdy. Does that make sense? Purdy, San Francisco onslaught with Devontae Smith, maybe. You still there?
Yeah, sorry. Let's see how that looks.
Okay. Yep. All right, so we're gonna go Purdy, and then you like Ayuk better than Debo, and George Kittle. It sounded like you had the most interest in George Kittle as a GPP play. Is that correct?
Yeah, I talked about this with Johnny last night. If we're gonna go this route, he thinks you should be unique in not playing McCaffrey, and Ayuk Kittle dub stack I think is interesting. Purdy historically not a guy to dub stack, especially not without McCaffrey, but extreme pass funnel matchup, top 3 matchup, should be forced to keep their foot on the gas.
Do you want to do the Devontae Smith bring back?
Yeah.
All right. Now we're down to 4640 left.
So it's another Moss.
Another Moss. Yeah, that's true. Moss probably makes sense in this one. Where are you? 4,600. Zach Moss. All right. Oop, that didn't work. Wait. Oh, it did work. Okay. All right. So we're still at 4,650 per player. Throw in a defense here to bring down our costs. You want to go Broncos?
Yeah.
All right. 5,300 left per player. There are some good cheap wide receivers, right, that we could play. We could play. Go back to Curtis Samuel. Play A.T. Perry.
Downs, Dortch, Elijah, Guyton, Perry. I'm probably missing one or two. You like Jameson. Our projections really like Jameson.
All right, you want to go? Should we go Dortch? What do you think? We could do Dortch and then a Pittsburgh player for some secondary correlation.
If we're gonna go Miami fade, do we go Mostert?
I mean, I love Mostert.
Or do we just not play anyone from Miami? What
Well,
makes more sense? Probably playing Mostert, right?
probably
If we
playing
can fit
Mostert.
it.
I wonder if we could play Mostert and one of the Pittsburgh receivers. I don't remember the exact price tags, but to me that would make.
Deontay's 5K.
Wait, where is Mostert? He's 7,300. Ooh, we could fit
We could go down
Pickens.
from.
We could fit Pickens at. He's 4,800.
Yeah, but what's Deontay? 5K?
5K.
Yeah, I'd rather play Deontay and then move down from Broncos to what is it? Buccaneers or Panthers?
Panthers against Tampa. We could play the Patriots against the Chargers. Would you just want to play the Panthers there?
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, Panthers.
Okay. So you like Deontay. See, our tool is like Pickens, so I was inclined to go there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to being wrong. He's just clearly been the wide receiver one since he's come back, in my opinion.
Yeah. Ton of correlation here. We got the Purdy double with the Devontae bringback. We got the Arizona and Pittsburgh. So that's kind of nice. Yeah, I think this looks like a pretty solid lineup here. You good with it?
Yeah, I'm just thinking if we could, how much more expensive is Miami's defense?
More expensive. Let me see.
Is it 600?
Dolphins, where are you?
Oh yeah, never mind.
3,900. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like this.
All right, we're doing it. There you go. There's 2 lineups.
Boom.
2 milli lineups. All right. Well, I know that you've got things to do, Scott. So I am going to ask you. Do you have any final words for the people?
No, thanks for tuning in. Sorry, we cut it short. If you liked it shorter, mention that in the YouTube comments. Check out my article, Scott Barrett's DFS breakdown. It's free this week. Probably won't be free again for another 6 years. So check that out. Subscribe to fantasypoints.com. Subscribe to stokastic.com. Yeah, you can find the links to all of our stuff. So we've been looking at on the Stokastic side, we've been looking at the Boom Bust tool, the Top Stacks tool. All that is included in all of the Stokastic NFL packages. The links are in the description to all of the individual packages for Stokastic, and then I think we just have a link to Fantasy Points in general. But there's in the top right there, you can find every different plan available at Fantasy Points there as well. So everything that we looked at today, you can find in the links in the description of this video. And of course, in Scott's article, he teased one player, one running back, his top running back. He didn't give it to us on this show. So he's I did. He was my top running back until 45 minutes before the show. And I was like, no, it's A-Chain. A-Chain's my top, but he's my number 2. Also, Bijan was right below him. I forgot to mention Bijan. Love Bijan. There's probably a few other names like that, but yeah, my priapism causing second favorite running back GPP play. Check out the article.
Yeah, go check out, and you can find it. It's on your Twitter, right? At Scott Barrett DFB, Dude Fantasy Bro. Is that right? Dude Fantasy
That's
Bro.
Right.
Go check out.
What does player Q stand for? What's the Q? Are you QAnon?
I'm QAnon. This is the big reveal. Yeah, it was, at one point I bought a million different websites that were like player and then a letter, player and then a number, and then player Q, like player questions, was one that somebody almost bought from me for playerq.com for $5,000 at one point. Eventually, they backed out of the deal, and I think I let it go eventually. So it might be available out there, but it was something that I decided I was going to make it my brand. I was going to start my own website where people could ask me player questions, and then I never did that, but I still have it as my username. So not the best story there, but that's where it comes from. Just I bought the domain and somebody almost bought it and then they didn't, so I kept the name. I don't know. All right, that is going to do it for this show. We've got places to be. Thank you guys very much for watching. Please do hit the like button if you haven't already done so, and of course subscribe to our channels. Good luck tomorrow.